People in. I see people are joining. Congratulations to the first 10 people who joined. You officially get to say first. If you want to say first in the chat, you can. That's kind of exciting. La la la. We're glad you're here. As you join, please feel free to put your name and your organization and where you're coming in from. And if you want to say your favorite kind of cookie, you totally could. Or don't, or just don't do anything in the chat. That's an option too, I guess. Thank you, Ted Fay from Feeding America. Right on. So far, the two people who've done it, three people. Oh, hi, Tyus from Karen Kirchhoff. Lovely. Oh, myasthenia's gravis. Oh, chocolate chip and oatmeal. Like together, Michael? You want the chocolate chip and oatmeal cookies together? Or is it like two separate cookies? Why not? Okay. As you join, please feel free to put your name and your organization and where you're calling in from. And if you want to say your favorite kind of cookie, please feel free. And you're calling from Vancouver, Canada. That's cool. We're global, man. We are in fact global. That's we're also releasing today our UK and Ireland benchmark study. So we actually are global. It's pretty exciting. And oh, cookie dough kind of cheated there. Oh, right. All desserts are welcome from Nebraska Public Media. That feels like a really like heartland thing to say, Cameron. And again, for people just joining, feel free to put your name, your organization, where you're calling in from, and your favorite kind of cookie. Eric Joe, San Francisco AIDS Foundation. Eric, I'm calling in from San Francisco too. Maybe you're not in San Francisco, but you just work for SF AIDS Foundation. But one thing to do when you're typing this is to change how you're sending this to make it to everyone. So when you're in the little panel where you type, you have to change the little drop down box to everyone. So I love oatmeal raisin cookies. I feel like they're a divisive cookie. This is for Mark Eller from Leave No Trace in Boulder. Because a lot of people don't like raisins. That's a thing I've recently learned. I think they're delicious. What do I know? Must be soft, not crunchy from Zach at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. Right on. We're going to keep on keeping on here just because we've got a lot of folks have joined and lots of people sign up for a webinar, but then they really just want to download the deck. I just think it's more fun live. And you get to ask your questions, get to see us make mistakes, all that jazz. I mean, we don't make mistakes, obviously, but some people do, not us. We're just going to start in about 1 minute here. As you join, please put in your name, where you're calling in from, your organization name, and your favorite kind of cookie. And panelists, if you haven't done so already, feel free to add yours as well. Vegan chocolate chip. The dash of espresso powder. Oh, that's an interesting recipe. Mm-hmm. Chocolate peanut butter cookies this all sounds good. Maybe this was a bad thing to do while we start a webinar where we're not going to have any snacks whatsoever. Right on. Okay, well, as folks join, I just want to say a big welcome to everyone who's joined us today on this super nerdy but super important topic on third-party cookie deprecation or depreciation. I'm going to let Sarah explain that to you in a few minutes. I'm Madeline Stanionis. I'm a partner at M&R, and I have the pleasure of hosting today's webinar. I am in San Francisco, California, and my favorite cookie is a miso almond butter cookie that I can't stop making. It's so delicious. It's really, if anyone wants the recipe, I'll link it in the chat. It's really truly yummy. The recipe that I have is for peanut butter, but I changed it to almond butter, and I think it's better. That's just me. And for folks who don't know much about M&R, we are a consulting firm. We work only with nonprofits, and we're mostly here to figure out every way possible to reach people, to engage them in the causes that they care about. And whether that is through fundraising or through advocacy or through organizing or media and PR and campaign strategy, we do whatever it takes to get folks to engage in the causes that really matter to them. We've been doing this for 30 years. And one thing to know about us is that we are wild about sharing what we learn. We're always interested in collecting data and also just advancing knowledge about how to manage this increasingly fractured media landscape world and really sharing that. We don't believe there should be any secrets. We want mostly to help other organizations just achieve their best results. And you can't do that without understanding the tools and how they're changing so quickly. And so this webinar is just one more chance for us to just impart some education about what's happening in the advertising world with cookies and what you can do about it so that you can continue to go out and do the important work that you're doing out there in the world. And a couple things about this webinar. One is it is being recorded. So you are being recorded, and the recording will be available and sent to you within a day or two. And also to all registrants. So if somebody wasn't here, they'll get the recording as well. The recording includes the chat and the questions there. We don't send out the actual deck. We just send out the whole recording, so you'll have access to that. We also have a blog post that covers a good portion of this. So if you're looking for something in writing too, we do have a blog post. Check out our blog. A couple other things to note that we will be happy to answer your questions during the presentation, generally speaking. So you can ask questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. So you see a little Q&A button, and it's down there in the middle lower part of the screen, and that's where we'll be answering questions. You're free to also chat in the chat. We don't always see the questions because everything sort of rolls up. So if you ask a question in the chat, we might not be able to see it. One thing to note when you're chatting is to change your to everyone. You'll see the little drop down box that says host and panelists or specific names, and then this is everyone. So always change it to everyone so everyone can see you. I am joined today by three really great folks. Two of them I get to work with every day, and Emily, I get to work with you sometimes. So Kristen Witkin and Sarah Coughlin are both in our advertising area. And Kristen is a senior vice president in advertising, and Sarah Coughlin is the director of advertising technology. We're also joined by Emily Martin, the director of digital marketing for the International Rescue Committee. Really appreciate everyone taking time out of their busy, busy day. Emily, especially you, for joining us. Really appreciate that. I'm going to actually turn it over to my friend and colleague, Sarah, to kick us off.
Yeah, thanks, Madeline. Hi, everybody. Like Madeline said, my name is Sarah Coughlin. I'm our director of advertising technology, or as I like to think of it, our main cookie monster. This is the one and only cookie that we'll be putting on the slides today, so enjoy it while it's up. Today's conversation is going to be in a couple of parts. So first, I'm going to take you through an overview of third-party cookies, why they matter, what's happening to them, and the one thing that we think all nonprofits need to be doing right now. Then I'm going to turn things over to Kristen and Emily, who are going to talk about some of the considerations that we think are important for nonprofits right now. I just want to really underscore briefly what Madeline was saying about how this can feel like a pretty inaccessible topic, but we are all here because we want it to be very accessible. We want everyone to leave this conversation feeling smarter and better equipped. So please liberally use the Q&A. Kristen and I are going to keep an eye on that as we go through. We'll have time for questions at the end and then hopefully in the middle. So yeah, want to make sure if there are any comprehension barriers, we cover them as we go through. Okay, that's my preface. I want to start with the most important technical question that we will discuss all of today, which is it cookie deprecation or cookie depreciation? I have heard both. It makes me feel insane. I Googled it and people were using both and I was like, what is happening here? So I did a little bit of research because that is the kind of person I am. And my conclusion, based on research, is that it is deprecation. To deprecate something is to phase it out, which is what we are doing with third-party cookies. To depreciate something is to reduce the value, which is what we actually don't want to happen to our advertising work. You can also deprecate something as in say that it's bad. Feel free to deprecate cookies. I will be deprecating cookies through this conversation. And then I was going to make like a cute little joke about there not being an I in team or in cookies, but then Kristen, as anyone who has worked with her knows, is incredibly detail oriented, and she pointed out that there actually is an I in deprecation. So ignore that joke. I never made it. All right. But now that that's out of the way, I want to like get into the actual substance of our conversation. Um, if you are here, I'm assuming that you know that third-party cookies exist and are important, but that might be the limit of your knowledge. That's fine. I have been there. And so I think it's helpful to actually just like start with some basics of definition of terms. What are we actually talking about? Third-party cookies, on a fundamental level, are just the technology that allows advertisers to follow people around the internet. That's it. You have interacted with cookie-based ads probably like in the past hour. You definitely know when you see them. It is when you are haunted by that one sweater that has been stalking you around the internet for weeks and weeks. That's cookies. Cookies did that to you. I'm so sorry. They are used on display and video ads. They're not as much of a factor for search and social. So I want to note that for everyone. And they're really used for two core purposes: audience building and reporting. Audience building is the person who looked at the sweater is going to get targeted by a bunch of ads. Reporting is the relentless stream of many, many, many ads influence their inevitable purchase of the sweater. Those are the two core use cases. We're going to talk in a bit more detail about how they work out for nonprofits, but that's why cookies exist. And both of those two purposes, audience building and reporting, are like fundamental to advertising, right? And so they've been part of the ad supported web for going on 30 years now. We literally have been using them since the late 90s. But the thing is, right, like technology changes and improves, and the industry consensus has come to be that third-party cookies are no longer serving the needs of the modern ads industry. And like, if you ask people about this, the big reason that they're often going to give is privacy, that third-party cookies enable advertisers to access potentially sensitive information without user consent. And that's real and that's important. It's also, to me, only one of several reasons why third-party cookies are not a great technology. They're just not ideal from an advertising perspective. They haven't kept up with our needs as an industry. And in particular, the issues are, one, that they expire after a certain amount of time. Cookies aren't forever. And two, that they only work in web browsers. And at this point, we're serving a lot of ads through the internet in contexts other than web browsers, like internet connected TVs or audio streaming apps. Cookies are useless in that environment. So we sort of like need to get rid of them anyway, as like the core way that we measure ads performance. So the industry is phasing them out. Google Chrome gets a lot of airtime here because their plan is to fully phase them out in 2025. They also, I think, get a lot of airtime because Chrome keeps pushing back their deadline. Like, truly, if you ever feel bad about yourself as a procrastinator, Google Chrome cookie deprecation timeline, you will instantly feel better about yourself. They keep pushing this back. But what I really want you all to understand is that cookie deprecation is not a future issue pending Chrome. It is a current real-time issue because Safari and Firefox have already phased out support for third-party cookies. So any impacts of third-party cookie deprecation, which we're going to talk about, Kristen and Emily will have some thoughts on that, all of those impacts are already present for more than a third of browser traffic. So this is happening right now. If you don't do anything about it, it will still affect your year-end campaigns, even if Chrome has not deprecated cookies by then. Okay, so I kind of want to pause here and say that I think like the industry agrees that third-party cookies are bad. The industry also agrees that their core functionality of audience building and reporting is really important. So when we talk about cookie deprecation, I think it's less helpful to talk about it as something going away, more helpful to frame it in terms of replacement. We are switching from third-party cookies to a different set of technologies, and those replacements are designed to serve a similar function but work better. And of those technologies, the most important one, and the one that I'm going to spend most of my time talking about today, is cookieless identity solutions. And this is that one really big thing that we think all nonprofits need to do. It is to adopt these cookieless identity solutions, aka start passing back hashed first-party data, such as email address, to your ads partners, such as Google and your DSPs. And I'm guessing if there is one point today where I'm going to lose all of you, it's exactly what I just said. You're like, oh my God, what are these phrases? Why am I here? I've made a terrible mistake. It's not that bad. I promise it is less complicated than it sounds. I'm going to walk through some examples. Again, use the Q&A feature if any of this isn't making sense. I want to make sure that everybody's following along. But I tend to think that this is easiest to understand through a like sample path to conversion. So let's start with sort of the beginning, right? Someone visits a publisher website, which is just the industry term for like the New York Times, and they see an ad for, let's say, our friends at the IRC that's served by some ads platform. When that happens, whoever served the ad drops a cookie on their browser. And it's literally just a way of saying like, hi, we were here, we served an ad. Fast forward later that day, maybe this person's watching the news. They are hearing about the crisis in Ukraine. They want to contribute to relief efforts. They are thinking about specifically the IRC because of this ad that they saw earlier today. So they go to rescue.org and they make a donation. At that point, rescue.org will also drop, you guessed it, a third-party cookie into their browser. So we've got two cookies, right? One at the point of the ads interaction and then one at the point of conversion. The final step is that the browser sends both of these cookies onto the ads platform, and then that is matched back. And that's how the ads platform says the same person over here is the one over here. So that's how we can say this interaction influenced this conversion. So that's cookie-based reporting. Cookie-based audience building is pretty similar. So again, let's say somebody has a conversion path where they like visit an advertiser website like rescue.org. Again, that website drops a cookie on their browser. Later on, that person goes to a publisher website like the New York Times. We want to be able to serve them an ad. And so that cookie is passed forward. Like there's an opportunity when somebody loads a web page to serve them an ad. And so when the advertiser, the IRC, is deciding whether to serve them an ad, they basically call back the cookie from that earlier web visit to find out, is it the same person who visited our website who we now have the opportunity to serve an ad to? So in both cases, both reporting and audience building, essentially cookies are just being used to identify the same person, to say the one over here is the one over here. That's literally all we're doing. In both of those cases, the really important thing is that the browser is acting as the conduit for those cookies. So the cookies are dropped on a publisher website and on an advertiser website, and then they have to go through the browser before making their way to the ads platform. And so cookie deprecation is really very specifically the process of the ads platforms. So this is Chrome, Safari, Firefox, saying, we're not going to cooperate in this information exchange. We're not going to pass forward the third-party cookies. And that's really important because that information is what links all of this together. So without the exchange of information, the whole thing falls apart. Okay. But again, I want to go back to what I said, which is that remember that the ads industry likes having identifiers. We want to be able to say the person who interacted with ads and the person who later converted are the same. We're all on board with that. The question is just, do cookies need to be the set of identifiers that we're using? And we are all in agreement that no, it should not be. So when we talk about cookieless identity graphs and first-party identifiers, really it's just the industry saying the identifier instead of a cookie needs to be something else. And I think this is easiest to understand if we go back to that same example from earlier. So this is the reporting where somebody visits a publisher website like the New York Times, they see an ad, later on they go to the advertiser website and they convert. Rather than using a cookie to say these were the same two people, we collect a piece of information at both touch points that can then be matched back. And specifically the piece of information that we collect is an email address. So when they're on the publisher website like the New York Times, they log in using their email. Later on, when they're making a donation, they provide an email address. And then those two email addresses get passed on to the ads platforms, and the ads platforms say, oh my goodness, sarahcoughlin@gmail.com was on the New York Times. sarahcoughlin@gmail.com made a donation to the IRC. That's the same one. This is the same person. Exact same thing with audience building. So if someone visits an advertiser website like rescue.org and there's a little pop-up that's like, hey, we're glad you're here. We'd like to be able to email you in the future. Can you give us your email address? Great. I say, okay, sarahcoughlin@gmail.com. Later on, I'm on the New York Times. I'm logged into the New York Times with the same email that I provided. So when there's an opportunity to serve me the ad, then we can check back and say, is the email address that was used to log into the Times the same one that was provided during this earlier interaction with the advertiser? I think one of the big questions that we get around this, certainly one that I've gotten, is like, it seems like the login requirements for publishers are a core part of this whole thing. And that kind of begs the question of like, how many people are actually logged into these websites? I will say estimates on this vary, but they tend to be pretty high. And we expect them to get a lot higher. That's because publishers derive nearly all of their revenue from ads and subscriptions. And so there's obviously really high incentive for them to require login to access content. So like this pop-up that I screenshotted here when I was reading about the Chicago Sky, and they were like, give us your email address. You should expect to see a lot more of these. There's also a lot of money and effort being expended in the industry to support these login requirements. So a lot of publishers are using single sign-on, which enables login sharing. Like if I log into the Chicago Sun-Times, maybe they can use that same login to recognize me if I'm visiting like the New York Times. So this is also going to support all of this sort of whole process. That being said, not every publisher visit will be logged in. Sometimes people are on a free trial, they're in incognito, blah, 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 blah. In those cases, the platforms are going to use modeling, which is basically if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, we're going to call it a duck. So they're using other information aside from a login to assess if a given site visit looks similar to others, and then we can make decisions about whether to attribute ads to, whether we to attribute conversions to ads interactions, or whether to bid on impressions. So there is a solution for inventory that is not like specifically identifiable as coming from one person. Okay, I want to be super clear with you all that like this is the solution to cookies. And I know because a group of really smart people at M&R spent literally the past year looking for alternatives, and there just aren't any. Like this is the thing the industry wants people to use is identifiers that are based on first-party data, such as email address, name, phone number, etc. So technically, you cannot do this, but from an ads perspective, it would be a very bad idea because it will severely limit your ability to build audiences and report on performance, which I assume are things that you want to be able to do. So this is important. Like this is not, it's technically optional, not really. That being said, I want to recognize that like this is a different use of supporter data. You are passing information to ads platforms to a degree and in a way that you were not before. And at M&R, we take really seriously our burden to be good stewards of supporter data. So I want to share a little bit of context on what's being done to protect the privacy of that information, as well as some thought starters for organizations that might be considering this shift. If you ask anyone in the ads industry what is being done to protect the privacy of this data, they're going to talk about hashing and clean rooms and pseudonymous identifiers. And again, then your eyes will roll back in your head and you're like, what are we doing here? So just to quickly explain that, hashing means that when the data is collected, either from publishers or advertisers, so at this point, it is encrypted before it's sent on. So even if somebody intercepted that data, they couldn't open the box and see the raw names or email addresses. That's the first piece of it. The other part around clean rooms and pseudonymous identifiers, which is truly an awful phrase, is that once the hash data is received by the platforms, it is stored in a place where no one outside of the platform can access the underlying data, and it's converted to a different identifier. So rather than like the IRC and the New York Times saying, oh, sarahcoglin@gmail.com is looking at this article, rather they would say ID A1B2C3 is looking at this article, and only the ads platform knows that ID A1B2C3 is equivalent to sarahcoglin@gmail.com. So what you may be picking up on is the through line is that the platforms are really tightly controlling access to the underlying data. And so the ethical data stewardship question to me becomes, do you trust the platform? And as we were talking about this as a company, um, really 4 questions came up that we think are relevant for nonprofits. And I'm so sorry, there's a lot of text on the slide. I couldn't think of a better way of saying it all, so bear with me. The first question is, to what extent are you literally already trusting this vendor? And is this different from what you're already doing? I say this because a lot of organizations are already uploading lists to these vendors. Like you might be downloading list of all supporters, then uploading it to Google. So if you're doing that, you're already sharing first-party data to some extent. You're just doing it manually and on a time delay. So I think this is a good opportunity to ask, are we comfortable with that practice? If the answer is yes, you're really just automating it. If this is an opportunity to say, actually, we don't like that practice, then again, you may draw different conclusions. So that's one piece of it. The second is, to what extent do you literally trust this particular vendor? And I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that the people here on this call may trust Google, for example, with our data much more than we trust, say, Facebook or TikTok. That's going to be a little bit of a moving target. Trust in the tech industry is a whole thing, but I want to recognize that this is going to be a big part of the decisions you're making. The next piece, which I think is maybe a little bit less obvious unless you spend a lot of time thinking about advertising, is who else is this vendor working with and who else will benefit from your data. So specifically, if you are feeding information into one of these vendors, they're not just necessarily going to be using it to attribute ads to you. They might also be using that to build a model of like, this is the type of person who donates to progressive causes. Maybe you think, oh, that's great. I want other progressive causes to benefit from that data. You might also think, oh, maybe like the bad guys are going to use that to suppress this audience from their ads and make their ads more effective. And in like an election year, given everything that's going on, I think there's a good case for feeling a little bit squickier about that. So it might be okay, but I think it's worth considering. The last thing that came up for us is the question of whether you have specific sensitivities around your particular supporters and their particular data. And I think this applies to a lot of organizations. The big ones that came to mind for me were health organizations, and then also organizations that are working on reproductive rights and access or LGBT issues. Those are cases where you might feel like, in the current environment, given the context of everything that my supporters are sort of going through and dealing with, maybe I don't want to be giving the tech industry data about them specifically. Now, I want to point out here, these tech platforms literally do not want certain kinds of information. Like Google will not let you tell someone someone's health information. They will not let you tell them someone's sexual orientation. Like they're going to block certain information. But I could still see an organization saying, like, if, for example, trans rights are under attack, I don't want even the fact that someone donated to an LGBT organization to be potentially accessible. So again, I think it's kind of like a tricky decision that organizations will need to make. And there's not necessarily a good answer, but it's worth thinking about.
Sarah, I want to pause here for a moment. There's been a bunch of questions in the chat. In case we were wondering if everybody here was our people, our nerdy friends in our industry, they are. So the questions are really nicely nerdy, so appreciate that. I think we've addressed some of the privacy questions. So those of you who asked questions around privacy, I do think that Sarah addressed that in the last slide, but if you still have that, I want to encourage you to ask some of the privacy questions in our Q&A feature. We'll be able to actually answer those in writing for you. But there was Michael Burlington, I think it's Burlington, asked if it was a challenge to get all email addresses for all isn't it a challenge to get the email addresses for visitors to your web? What happens if this doesn't happen?
Yeah. This is Michael, I feel like you may be a plant for our slides. This is something we're going to talk about later, is that this is one of the reasons why we really encourage doing more to collect supporter information, both in terms of on your website, like thinking more seriously about data collection pop-ups. This also could be a reason to invest more heavily in like lead generation. Yeah, because if you don't have that information about folks, you are going to lose the ability to follow them around in the way that you have before.
Then there was another.
Sorry, I just wanted to expand on that a little bit more. So while the solution we're talking about is like best and you need to do it, especially for donation tracking, where that email capture is going to happen organically, your website visitors, while we won't be able to reach everybody because everyone visiting your site doesn't put their email in, We also will be able to reach those people if they are logged into their Google Chrome browser while they're visiting your site, because they're already logged into Google, and so Google can identify them that way.
A couple other questions that have come up. Let's see. So what about the fact that lots of people have multiple email addresses and some of them are their crap email addresses that they put in, you know, when they're, I don't know, they don't want to give people their email address. So there's a couple questions around what do we do about that?
Yeah, good question. Okay, so I gave this example of the pseudonymous identifier, terrible phrase, I'm so sorry, that's associated with my email. So from the perspective of the platform, I'm A1, B2, C3, whatever, I know that it's my email address, sarahcoughlin@gmail.com. There's not a one-to-one map between that identifier and the underlying information like my email. Rather, it's that this identifier, A1, B2, C3, etc., is associated with all kinds of biographical information about me. So primarily, that's going to be my email address. If I have a secondary email, that's also going to be mapped to that. It might also include information like my IP address, my physical address. Can you sort of like see me putting on the tinfoil hat as I describe this? Basically, the idea is that these identity graphs are designed to incorporate any biographical information. So if someone is using multiple email addresses, if the data is complete enough, we'll still be able to say that those multiple emails are associated with the same person, hopefully.
Let's keep going. More questions are coming in. As I said, use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. Okay, if you ask them in the chat, and we might get to those as well. I just don't want them to get lost. So, but let's keep moving along, and then we'll come back to some of these more questions in a little bit.
Cool. Appreciate the gut check, Madeline. I mean, I think so. So this is like basically kind of the way that I would think about this with the sort of like ethical of it all is I think from a performance perspective, this is really straightforward. From a data stewardship perspective, it's a little bit more complicated. I think organizations might also find that there's a little bit of a cost benefit analysis, right? That if more invasive use of supporter data allows you to marshal the financial resources that lets you do your work through fundraising, then maybe it's worth it. I don't have an answer to those questions. I think it is one that organizations are going to reach on their own. The big thing is there's going to be a certain amount of technical work associated with onboarding these solutions. We're not going to go into those technical details today, but like they do exist. And so I think the important thing is if you are interested in doing this, you need to start having the conversations with stakeholders now so that those conversations are wrapped up in time for you to implement the technical solutions in time for them to benefit your year-end campaigns. All right. And this is where I know we had like a few questions in the chat, like Peter, I think had one about this, like touching on companies like Viant and the Trade Desk. Behold, this is a list of the identity solutions that M&R has looked into. I'm not going to read through this list because, oh my goodness, it is long, but I encourage you to screenshot it and continue using the chat if you have questions about any of the particular solutions outlined here. I will gladly nerd out with you about that while Kristen and Emily talk about these other things. But basically, these are sort of solutions that we've looked at that we think that everybody should be considering. And yeah, that basically concludes my techie rant. I'll keep an eye on questions, but yeah, I think I can go ahead and hand things over to Kristen and Emily now.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. So yeah, while Sarah kind of walked through the one thing we want all advertisers to do, because that's really going to have the biggest impact on your program with first-party data sharing, there are also lots of questions that are really going to be more unique and individual to your program and your organization. So these are really things that we want to highlight for you and things that you should be really thinking about within your own organization. And you might be asking, like, why are we talking about this so much now when Chrome keeps pushing their timeline back? Well, really, they do keep pushing their timeline back, but they are now at a place where they actually have a product in the market that is actively being tested. And we do think it is upcoming and on the horizon. But beyond that, it's not just Chrome that has web traffic and has cookies. Safari and Firefox got rid of their cookies years ago, so this is already impacting your programs as they currently stand. Just as a side note, I was a major depreciation person until I had this conversation with Sarah. So sometimes I accidentally still say depreciation, but I'm doing my best to change things and use deprecation. All right, so number one question is, what impact is cookie deprecation already having on my revenue? Most likely it is already having some sort of impact. So what is that really looking like for you right now? Most of your organizations and nonprofits are likely spending your advertising dollars in these first three buckets of the consumer journey: awareness, engagement, and conversion, which are also going to be the three stages that are most impacted by cookie deprecation. So that's the areas that we'll really want to be thinking about and looking at. So if you remember this slide that Sarah walked through about retargeting users and using cookies in order to do that, that is going to be going away on Chrome eventually, but it's already something that we're not able to do right now on Safari and Firefox. So we're already losing the ability to retarget people who are coming to your website and donating right now on those browsers. And you can really see this in the numbers. So if you look at your Google Analytics, it probably has showing a lot more volume of people coming to your website and people who are donating than you're actually seeing in your retargeting pools of the people that you're able to then reach and follow up with and retarget. So this is an example where Google Analytics was showing like 402,000 people coming to your site, but then your retargeting pool, depending on the ads platform, was a lot less than that. And potentially Google Ads is a little bit higher because they do have some ability to reach and model off of cookieless environments, where Viant and Yahoo might not have that same ability. So we can look at a couple different ways and talk about ways that your program might now be impacted by Firefox and Safari already having not allowed cookies. So maybe you are using display and video during like really high traffic periods, like an end of year or an emergency, but it's just not performing the way that you thought it would. And that might be because a lot of your conversions are happening in Firefox and Safari, and you just can't track them. So they're actually happening, and display and video are driving that performance for you, but you can't track it, and so you don't know. So that's one piece. Another thing that you might be thinking about is if you are investing in upper funnel channels, but then you're not seeing those conversions come through on lower funnel channels like search, or you're not seeing site traffic coming from that. That might be because you aren't able to retarget everyone that is seeing those upper funnel ads because those upper funnel investments are happening on Firefox and Safari, and therefore we're not able to retarget them. Or you might just be seeing a big difference in the performance of each of your different DSPs. And that's because the methodology of each of those different ads platforms is vastly different, some of which were really based off of third-party cookies. And that's what they've been optimizing towards for years and years, while others were actually started kind of with cookieless in mind. And so they have been optimizing with cookieless in mind for years and years. And that's really going to make the performance of those different partners different now, and especially different once Chrome gets rid of them as well. So those are a few examples of what might be going on in your program. I'd like to hear from Emily at IRC and understand what you all are seeing.
Thanks, Kristen. Again, I'm Emily Martin, Digital Marketing Director at IRC. And I'm really here representing the psyche of organizations who joined the call today. I worked at the IRC for 15 years, the last 15 years. I think Sarah mentioned that cookies have been around for 30. So I've been at the IRC for 50% of cookies lifetime. So anyone who's sort of been in this, in the digital advertising space for the last few years knows that it was very different a few years ago, and maybe you're already experiencing those differences now. As Sarah and Kristen mentioned, that this is already happening now. We certainly are at the IRC. And so that's really what's keeping me up at night right now, is just that the change that we've seen in terms of, how we can target and, how we can track and also report. And so it's been very difficult. basically convincing leadership and also our finance team to continue to invest in digital marketing because of these changes. And that's the really difficult and challenging part, and why I think many of you have joined this call, because you want to figure out what the solutions are. But we all know that even though these challenges exist and we're sort of learning these new solutions, I'm actually on this call, learning a lot as I go through this webinar too. We know that digital marketing is still very much worthwhile. We know that people still have smartphones at their bedside table when they sleep at night, and while they're watching connected TV, they're also on social media. So we know that digital is in our lives and it's not going anywhere. And so even though these challenges are happening, this is still very much where we need to be investing our time and energy and our budget, in my opinion. And so getting the organizations that we work for to understand these changes, prepare for them, and also, continue to invest and think about things a bit more holistically. Even though we can't, directly attribute like we could in the past, it was always a bit challenging. It's more challenging now. It's still very much worthwhile to look at the holistic numbers as we speak to our leadership and our finance teams. And I'll pass it back to you, Kristen.
Thanks, Emily. So yeah, while everything that we talked about up to this point, where Firefox and Safari are already impacting your program, if you do decide to do the first-party data sharing, that will fix some of those problems where you'll be able to get more information on those users who are converting on those platforms. So it's another plug for why we think that you should be doing that. It might not solve all your problems on people who aren't logged in when they're visiting your website, though. All right, so the next question that you all should be asking yourselves are, what's your approach to cookieless reporting and what are your performance benchmarks? So this slide that Sarah walked you through that talks about each of the different identity graphs and capabilities of all of the different partners, that really means that the data is so fractured and like each of these partners are reporting in a different way, which really means that it's difficult for us to understand which of them is going to be performing the best. So we need to identify ways that we can get around that. Strategies you can do to kind of mitigate that. You can look at your CRM data, which is going to be more reliable. It'll have the same data across all of those different platforms. This will be really focused on your click-through data specifically, but it'll have one specific standard across all of the different platforms, so the data isn't so variant based on what the cookieless solution is by platform. If you're going to take this approach, you'll probably need to increase the granularity of your source coding so that you have all of the necessary data in your CRM to make optimizations effectively. So that would mean updating your source codes to include information on audience and creative, for example. Where the real challenge is going to be is having a unified approach for your view-through conversions, since there is no one existing technology or tool out there that allows you to easily do that across all the different cookieless identity solutions. So we can now talk about what M&R's approach to doing that is and how we're planning to report on view-through conversions through Scout Ads, which is M&R's reporting tool for ads. So let's just kind of take a step back and think about this specific scenario. So let's just say that you're running on DV360, Viant, and Yahoo, which are all three different ads platforms. Let's say that you've already adopted first-party data sharing with all three of them. That's great, but now each of them is telling you that they drove a donation. But in reality, it was just one user who happened to see an ad across all three of those different platforms. And they're the one who made a donation. So it's not really three different donations. It's just that one person who made one. But if you're looking at this fractured landscape, it inflates it and makes it look like three people donated. So kind of what do you do about that? And how do you find one solution that's going to make it so that the data is more accurate? And so what we're doing for Scout Ads is we're getting information from each of those 3 different partners on the transaction ID, and then using that transaction ID to deduplicate what the conversion was across all of those different platforms. So we'll know that there was only really one transaction ID, and therefore there was only really one conversion. From there, we'll have to work with you on how you want to attribute that. Like, does that conversion get credit for Viant, or does Yahoo get that credit? That's something that we would have a conversation with you on the best way to attribute that. And we can optimize Scout ads based on each individual nonprofit and what your comfortability is with different attribution models. A lot of nonprofits decide to default to a last interaction. So whatever happened last, this would be Yahoo in this case, but others can look at like time decay or even credit amongst each of those different 3 platforms. But that's really a conversation that we would have with you. And this is ultimately what the reporting would look like in using that approach. So we would have cost per donation as well as return on ad spend by each individual channel and site by using this approach. And we'll know that it's really just one donation and that CPD isn't being affected. From our knowledge, Scout Ads is the only platform that's going to be able to have this level of granularity once cookies are fully gone, because a lot of nonprofits and advertisers in the past have used Google Floodlights reporting solutions to report across different channels and sites. Once Google cookies go away, the reporting will be impacted as well, where you'll only be able to look at donations on that granularity. You won't be able to look at revenue. So you'll lose ROAS on the channel and site level, as well as the creative level, the placement level, the audience level, basically like every level that you need to make optimizations effectively for your program. So our solution helps get around that and allows us to continue having the granularity that we have now once Google removes cookies as well. That being said, if you don't have Scout ads, or we also kind of just like want to be prepared for the future in case something else happens, like if those partners are no longer able to pass back a transaction ID to us, what do we do? So there are a few different things that you could think about doing. One would be shifting your KPI to a cost per donation instead of so heavily focusing on ROAS, since that data is still going to be more widely available. You can also look at experimenting with more AI-driven formats like Google Performance Max, which kind of doesn't allow you to make a lot of optimizations anyway. It uses AI to look at the best audiences, creative, and mirrors those up on its own without kind of a manual optimization. So relying more heavily on those, since you won't be able to report on it or optimize it yourself, that does kind of leave a lot of eggs within the Google basket. And we haven't quite proven that out so far, but have seen strong performance, max performance for what we have tested so far. So that's something worth trying. And then lastly, kind of looking at the program overall and how ads is performing in general. So this could be looking at media mix modeling or brand lift studies or incrementality testing to kind of understand overall what your ads program investment and what channels perform well for you. So I know that IRC has done some incrementality testing with your awareness campaigns. Emily, do you want to walk us through what you all did?
Yeah, and this definitely gets at some of the questions I'm seeing in the chat about how to sort of make this case for leadership, which has definitely been a struggle, but something that we were able to do the last few years, and these results are from specifically last year, is incrementality testing that we did with a company called House and also with our Google contacts. And basically we're looking at, splitting, half the markets into, receiving YouTube advertising like YouTube for Reach ads, which is basically just YouTube videos, but optimized for reach. And half of the audience or the markets not receiving those ads leading up to Giving Tuesday and then also year end. And so not surprisingly, we then look and see what the difference between those two. And we found an incremental return of 52 cents on top of the return that we were getting from these markets at baseline, and an increase in revenue, small percentage, but at year end, definitely makes a difference. It's one of the ways I think that we are able to sort of prove out what we already know. Like we know that advertising has an impact on fundraising, even when we can't easily attribute it or track it or report on it. Using an incrementality test like this is the way that you can show your finance team or your leadership team, like, look, like this is literally having an impact. Markets who saw these ads were more likely to give. We saw, higher average gifts, like whatever KPIs that you're tracking. So I don't think I have all the answers to how to convince leadership. I'm still working through that on a daily basis. And obviously I'm lucky because I also have the M&R team to work with on that. But this is one of the tools in my toolbox that I use to make that case.
Well, thank you, Emily. So the last question we want to go over is, does your media plan need to shift? The answer is probably yes, which we'll go over some different ways that might be. So if you are not very confident in your view through conversion reporting capabilities, once cookies are gone, some things you might want to do are shifting your budget more towards click-through based channels like social, search, or Google Performance Max. If you want to continue investing in upper funnel investments, but don't want to scale too heavily on display or rely too heavily on display, another good option here is looking at connected TV or audio, which are already cookieless environments. And so they have been kind of working for years and years on making sure that they have reporting capabilities already to track these cookieless environments, and something that you can rely on now. Or if you're not satisfied with your current DSP or not satisfied with their answer on what they're doing about cookie deprecation, this is a good time to test new DSPs, especially ones that have a history in cookie lists, or looking at retesting existing partners after you've implemented first-party data sharing, because that will have an impact on what their performance looks like. So now I think we can take a look at the shifts that IRC has made.
Yep. So again, we work with our M&R partners to come up with this list. So this, going through some of the things that we've tried, we've tested cookieless vendors like AdTheorent and Viance, also cookieless reporting such as ArtsAI and Claritas. We also onboarded Google Enhanced Conversions and Meta Conversions API. We did that Meta Conversions API, I feel it was a couple years ago. So this is, again, stuff that if you haven't done already, definitely do. We are using LiveRamp for static audience uploads, and eventually we're going to also use them for some first-party targeting sort of options that they have. And soon we'll be we use Yahoo and we'll be implementing Connect ID and Next Gen coming up. And of course, we're also working with audio and CTV and, other things like that. So I think, for us and maybe many of you on this call, our plan in the past has been, Facebook and Google. And that was those were our two channels. And we invested everything into those two. We've really diversified since then. And so this is something that maybe should have been happening all along. The cookie future has forced us to do this, but ultimately it's been really healthy for our growth. So I think it's a good way forward.
Thanks, Emily. So in addition to the changing your media plan in terms of the different channels and partners that you're using, it's also important to look at the different tactics. So this is something that we talked about earlier with the questions in the chat, but when we're doing the whole audience building piece and using that first party data to match people, it does require you to have that initial data collection and basically have your supporters' emails. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about ways that we can do that and expand the way that you're getting that data collection. So this might look like having organic web capture on your website, like this example of REI on the right here with kind of a pop-up trying to get people's email addresses. This might look like expanding lead generation, or it might also mean that you want to retarget everyone on your existing email file and not just the folks that are like considered high quality, and really just overall focusing on ways that you can capture your users' email in order to make this as effective as it possibly can. That will mean that you need to be thinking about the new people that you're acquiring their emails and what their treatment looks like. So what does your email onboarding program look like, and evaluating the ROI of all of the emails that you're getting. So we have Scout ROI, which essentially takes a look at the emails that you've acquired by each channel over time to see the value that you're getting of them. And that's going to be important as you think about scaling up the emails that you're capturing. Great. So kind of wrapping up everything that we've talked about today, really the industry is in the middle of a really big shift, and it's going to be impacting everyone. So really right now, we think the number one thing you can be doing is that first party data sharing, and it's going to really make a big difference on the performance of your program. So that's kind of why we've harped on it so much today. But really also making sure that you're having those discussions internally and thinking about the ways that you're getting ready for a Google cookie deprecation, but also thinking about the ways that it's affecting your program now and what you can be doing currently about it.
We have room for some questions. We first of all, just there was a bazillion questions in our Q&A feature. Thank you for using that. Our team was actually doing a great job of trying to answer all of those while presenting. So got lots of those questions answered. But are there any questions that came through that we didn't quite hit for you? And if you want to raise them right now, we've got room for a couple questions here before we close up. Okay, y'all had a million questions throughout the whole rest of it, but now you're like, no, it's all done. We completely understand it, which is good. You did a great job, panelists. I don't know that we've ever had this active of a Q&A feature during a webinar, so y'all are really in it, and that really showed. It really showed. Here, Bonnie asked, what if passing back email data violates your privacy policy?
I would have a chat with your team about your privacy policy.
There's no way around it on this one.
Yeah, I think so.
Other questions?
I will say, having spent a lot of time looking at the chat over the past few minutes, I think there have been a lot of questions about basically like, oh my gosh, this seems like a lot of work. And yes, I think that is accurate. And in particular, there's like two pieces of that work. There's the sort of technical implementation of these cookieless identity solutions. And then there's also the media mix element of testing different partners. And I think for a lot of organizations, that second piece of testing different partners is going to be cost prohibitive. Similarly, like brand awareness studies are very expensive. And so that's part of why we really want to emphasize implementing the cookieless identity solutions as the most important thing, because it will take work in the sense of you need a developer to help set that up on your website, but it doesn't require the same kind of media investment that some of the other stuff does. So we think it's much more accessible for organizations of all sizes.
Okay, well, it's 3 minutes till we're out. And last questions, any last comments? Any I don't know, compliments? There are lots of compliments. This was really heady stuff, and it was really exciting to see so much interaction with this. And it sort of gives us all hope to see people asking all of these questions, because it really says that we're, as an industry and as a community, we're grappling with this big shift, and that's really exciting and important to see. So congratulations, all of you, for doing this, and for paying attention through all of it, at this complicated topic. As I said, the recording will be sent out to you. If you registered for the webinar, everyone will get a recording. Some people have asked about actual slides because there were some really good slides. We don't generally do that, but when you're watching the recording, you could just take a quick screenshot and there you go. You'll have the diagram that you need to explain it to other folks. Right on. Listen, have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.